In honor of the recent 189th Battle of the Alamo anniversary, we remember the coincidental 189 defenders and hundreds more Mexican troops that lost their lives in the early morning hours on March 6, 1836. You may be asking yourself, what on earth does Texas history have to do with Red Dead? If anyone saw my previous video from about 2 months ago, you'll know there's actually plenty of Texas history involved with Red Dead Redemption. In that video, I explained how the founder of Blackwater and Red Dead folklore legend, Josiah Blackwater, compared to real-life famous adventurer, congressman, frontiersman, and Alamo defender, Davy Crockett. If you haven't seen it yet, you'll find a link to it in the description. But Davy Crockett isn't all that we are remembering today. We are remembering something a little bit more than that. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, today we remember the Alamo and Goliad. Any true Red Dead veterans also remember the Alamo for being the battleground for one of the most pain-in-the-ass missions in the franchise's history. 20 years ago, you might have found yourself frustratingly respawning to the intro cutscene in the Red Dead Revolver mission, Fort Diego. If you're a Texan, I don't even have to explain it. You already know what that looks like. It's almost impossible for anyone living in the United States to not know the basic story of the Texas Revolution or the Battle of the Alamo itself. One of my best friends in high school, who is no longer with us, used to always say, "What do you mean the United States of America? You mean Texas and its 49 bitches?" Now, the mission itself. For any players out there who have not experienced Red Dead Revolver for themselves, I'll give you a brief rundown on this shit show of a mission. Protagonist Red Harlow and his cousin Shadow Wolf have separately escaped from jail in the Bear Mountain Mines. They reunite outside the mines and walk into the courtyard of Fort Diego, where an ambush has been waiting for them, arranged by the one-armed freak, Colonel Darren. The entire fortress itself is based on the Alamo grounds, as it were during the 13-day siege. Of course, the famous church, which still remains in San Antonio to this day, and Long Barrack, which is the oldest standing structure in Texas today, though all that remains is the lower level and outer walls. Rockstar chose to accurately portray the Long Barracks as a 2-level building. This is the area in which the bloodiest and most brutal of the fighting took place towards the end of the 90-minute battle. Some accounts from survivors claim that the blood that flowed from the floor of the Long Barrack was as high as their ankles. This could be possible since there was an actual 3 to 4 foot deep trench dug in the middle of the Long Barrack, which was meant to act as a final line of defense, but instead it trapped them and made them basically be in the middle of a turkey shoot. All that remains today of the original structure is the completed church and lower level of the Long Barracks. A few yards of the east wall and the entirety of the northwest and south walls were completely destroyed shortly after the battle. The Mexican army wanted to ensure that the Texans could not utilize the mission as a fortress again. But what I really appreciate here is the authenticity from Rockstar and how they chose to accurately portray the complete outer walls of the entire fort. They even included the cannon ramp to the weak north wall, which was where the Mexican army initially breached. And it's also the site where Commander William Barrett Travis was shot in the head and killed within the first few minutes of the battle. The long western wall here are full of small rooms that are in ruins, replicating the Indian houses that were built by the Spanish missionaries very early on in the mission's construction. By the time the Texans took control of the fort, the once small thriving community within the walls slowly faded to time, leaving only a few remnants of the Indian houses to serve as the commander's quarters and catwalks for the defenders to fire over, which also left them at a severe disadvantage. They were exposed to constant oncoming fire as the outer walls never reached more than 3 to 4 feet above the catwalks. After dealing with all of Darren and Diego's men in the rooms along the west wall, you turn to the south wall where you can take control of the Gatling. Realistically, the south wall was where the main gate into the fort was located and was very similar to how it's modeled here. In the real-life version, within the south wall was famous knife fighter and commander Jim Bowie, who was bedridden with a terminal illness similar to who we all know and could not actively participate in the final siege. It was reported by his sister-in-law that he was shot multiple times in the face, completely defenseless. And there's actually a hidden reference to Jim Bowie in the game, and it's in the description for the Bowie knife that you can read in the journal. Around the corner of the south wall, facing east, is where the Lunette and Palisade were located. Thought by some to be the weakest point of defense, which in reality, it was actually the strongest, due to the heavy concentration of the Tennessee sharpshooters and riflemen occupying these areas made it very difficult for the Mexicans to penetrate. Instead, the Mexican troops were redirected by Colonel Juan Morales to take the west wall and were shredded by oncoming cannon fire. That's just absolutely terrible. Some Mexican troops positioned outside the palisade were noted to dart for cover each time they saw the familiar top of the hat worn by probably the most famous of the Alamo defenders, the King of the Wild Frontier. Each time his rifle peeked over the wall, he for sure was adding to his kill streak. In absolute poetic fashion, the remaining survivors retreated inside the church to make their final stand, where they fought to the death. A great deal of controversy has surrounded the true ending of the siege, but one thing's for sure is that we owe both sides of this conflict a lot of respect for what they sacrificed. Now, why did I just give a history lesson? Yes, it actually pertains to the game. Now that we've had our recap, it's time to wake up because the interesting part is about to begin. Fort Diego is an old fort near Bear Mountain that was abandoned by the United States Army sometime after the war with Mexico. Shortly after discovering the gold mine in Bear Mountain, General Diego and his renegade army took over the stronghold and renamed it after himself. This is interesting because after the Texas Revolution and Mexican-American War, the United States Army claimed the Alamo, completing the roof of the chapel from the remnants of the destroyed surrounding walls, giving it its iconic rounded hump at the top. After extensive renovations, the Army used the Alamo as a supply depot, quartermastery, granary, and many other things for a few years, and then once again, like everyone else, she was abandoned. Some NPCs during this mission at Fort Diego are seen to be wearing outfits similar to Alamo defenders, and same in Red Dead Redemption 2. Not only Josiah Blackwater in his story, but you can even wear a badass coonskin cap like a true American frontiersman. That alone should have made this game win Game of the Year. This fort could have also been modeled, or influenced at the very least, from the recent, at the time, film adaptation of the Alamo that was released a month or so prior to Red Dead Revolver's release, which is by far the most historically accurate film regarding the Alamo. It's just such a shame that it flopped at the box office, but it's a history buff's dream. It could even be considered the perfect historical movie. I've had a lot of fun making this video and talking about one of my favorite subjects to study and research. Let me know what you guys think of the history series so far and what I should talk about next, if another historical reference or Easter egg in Red Dead Redemption, or just random history in general. I love to talk about that stuff. Anyway, I've flapped my gums for far too long already, so I'll go ahead and zip it, lock it, and put it in my pocket. We take this day to remember not only the Alamo, but if you're gonna play in Texas, you gotta have a fiddle in the band. Stay safe. Adios, amigos.